9/11 is the most tragic day in American history. Around 3,000 souls were lost that day to wicked men's deeds. I don't think there is any way to truly comprehend that level of evil. It was needless and callous. I know a lot of people ask about that day. Why? There is no good answer to that question. But perhaps if we take a look at the past and work forward in the timeline, maybe we can, at the very least, understand that it was just an act of cowardice by evil men. Humanity has always been evil, at the lowest depths. It is through faith in God that most of us climb from the depths of depravity and show compassion to a world of wickedness. I will never forget that day as long as I live, but I will not let what happened stir me to bitter anger and hatred. What we can do is learn from our shared experience in this tragedy and do all we can to prevent something like this from ever happening again. We must remain united, vigilant, and steadfast as Americans. Always remember, united we stand, divided we fall. In December of 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Classified protocols at the Jimmy Carter White House show American support for the Mujahideen Islamic rebels started as far back as March 1979. The U.S. was worried about the Soviets' increased involvement of propping up the weak pro-communist state in Afghanistan. The weapons the U.S. sent to the anti-communist rebels turned the tide of the war, favoring the rebels and doomed the Soviet Union and later would doom the United States. American support for the Mujahideen was only one of many foreign policies under Carter and Reagan that hurt America and Israel. Supporting the Afghan rebels was supposed to overcome our defeat in Vietnam. This is known as Vietnam Syndrome. Only hours after the Soviet invaded Afghanistan, then President Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, said he hoped, quote, the Soviets could be punished for invading Afghanistan, that they could be tied down and bloodied the way the United States had been in Vietnam, end quote. At the beginning, the U.S. government started sending the rebels some Soviet weapons that had been captured. This was to get revenge for the Soviets' involvement, limited though it was, in the Vietnam War, meanwhile keeping U.S. involvement to a minimum. This would turn out to be a terrible decision due to the fact the Islamic fundamentalism of the recent Iranian Revolution was coming to Afghanistan. The spring of 1979, the Shiite Muslim town of Heart, Afghanistan, there were religious activists organizing the fundamentalist lines, which were based on the example of the Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini. Even the non-Shia Muslim groups were starting to do the same thing based on Khomeini's religious political revival. December 1979, a top-secret amended document signed by President Carter, which was reauthorized in '81 by President Reagan, permitted the CIA to ship weapons secretly to the Mujahideen. The CIA would do this with the help of the Pakistani government secret service, Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI. In 1983, Congressman Charles Wilson from Texas visited Afghanistan as a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, and he started procuring billions of dollars in weaponry for the rebels, sending them first through Pakistan. The rebels started to receive more sophisticated weapons at that time in order to combat the Soviet attack helicopters. From 1982 to 1984, the U.S. sent the rebels portable surface-to-air missiles, the heat-seeking Strela 2 and the Red Eye. At the end of 1986 through the first half of 1987, the U.S. started sending Stinger missiles. The Soviet lost more Mi-24 helicopters in that 6 months than they had the whole previous year. From 1980 to 1989, the Russian periodical Mir Aviastia, 122 Mi-24s were lost, 42% due to Dushkas heavy machine gun, 30% by portable surface-to-air missiles, 25% by light anti-aircraft guns, and 3% by small arms fire. Arming the Afghan Mujahideen rebels and other non-Afghan rebels had disastrous consequences for Israel and the U.S. When the Taliban took over Kabul, an estimation of about 600 of the 2,300 Stingers were missing. The Iranians were buying as many as they could. The CIA estimated that Tehran had about 100 of these Stingers by 1996. During that time, the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, had 53 Stingers that various Pushtun warlords loyal to the Taliban had collected. The CIA worried that the Stinger missiles might fall into the hands of terrorist groups or hostile governments like Iran to possibly shoot down American civilian planes or military aircrafts. There were Mujahideen commanders who associated themselves with anti-American radical Islamist leaders that had some of the Stinger missiles. President Carter didn't resolve the Iran hostage crisis from 1979 to 1981. In February 1982, the U.S. government removed Iraq off the list of states supporting international terrorism and reopened diplomatic relations in December of 1984. From that time, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad provided the Iraqi military with intelligence. However, U.S. relations with Israel were especially bad after the Israeli Air Force's raid on the Iraqi nuclear reactor on June 7, 1981. This raid resulted in delaying a shipment of American aircrafts to Israel. The U.S. also voted for a UN Security Council resolution that condemned Israel. Many historians believe that the U.S. government support of the Mujahideen was to inflict a Vietnam on the Soviet. This decision did defeat the Soviet Union, but it created a hotbed for terrorists in Afghanistan. Iran also became more dangerous to American national security. This decision was an egregious mistake by the American government. Enter Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is a militant Islamist organization that was founded by Osama bin Laden in the late 80s. It began as a network to support Muslims fighting against the Soviet Union during the Afghan War. Members were recruited from all over the Islamic world. After the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, Al Qaeda dispersed. However, it still continued to oppose corrupt Islamic regimes and foreign presence in Islamic lands, like the United States. It was based in Sudan for some time in the early 90s, but later re-established its headquarters in Afghanistan in 1996 under the rule of the Taliban. Al-Qaeda grouped up with several other Islamist organizations, which included Egypt's Islamic Jihad and the Islamic Group. There were several occasions when Al-Qaeda leaders declared holy war on the United States. They established camps of Muslim militants from all over the world. Tens of thousands were trained in paramilitary skills. They engaged in several terrorist attacks. They destroyed U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania in 1998. There was a suicide bomb attack on the USS Cole in Yemen in 2000. This leads us into the terrorist attacks on the two World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon. It was Tuesday, September 11th, 2001 at 8:45 a.m. American Airlines Boeing 767 crashed into the North Tower. It left a large hole close to the 80th floor. Hundreds of people were instantly killed. Hundreds more were trapped on the floors above. People started evacuating the North Tower and the South Tower. It seemed to have been a freak accident. It would only be 18 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175, another Boeing 767, crashed into the South Tower near the 60th floor. As these events are playing out in front of our eyes, filling us with shock and terror, American Airlines Flight 77 flew over Washington, D.C., and at 9:45 a.m., the Boeing 757 crashed into the Pentagon. There was a huge explosion, causing structural damage, allowing the portion of the building to collapse. 125 military personnel and civilians were killed, along with all 64 passengers on the flight. Around 10 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. Not too long after, at 10:30 a.m., the North Tower collapsed, leaving only 6 survivors. Close to 10,000 were treated for injuries, many of them being severe. United Flight 93 left Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey and was hijacked 40 minutes later. Due to delays, the passengers on board had heard about the attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. from cell phone and airphone calls to the ground. Knowing this, a group of passengers and flight attendants decided to tape back over the plane. Thomas Burnett Jr. told his wife on the phone, "I know we're all going to die. There's 3 of us who are going to do something about it. I love you, honey." Todd Beamer was heard saying over an open line, "Are you guys ready? Let's roll." Flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw called her husband. She told him she was able to get into the galley and was filling pitchers with boiling water. The last thing she told him was, "Everyone's running to first class. I've got to go. Bye." The group attacked the 4 hijackers and supposedly attacked the cockpit with a fire extinguisher. The plane then flipped and was heading for the ground at more than 500 miles per hour. It crashed into a field near Shanksville in western Pennsylvania at 10:10 a.m. All 44 people aboard were killed. Although the intended target is not known, it is believed that it was heading for either the White House, the U.S. Capitol, Camp David in Maryland, or possibly one of the nuclear power plants along the eastern seaboard. We lost many people that day, a total of 2,997 people, including the 19 hijackers. These were citizens of 78 different countries. 2,764 people died after the towers were hit. This includes 344 firefighters and paramedics, 23 New York City police officers, and 37 Port Authority police officers. At the Pentagon, there was 189 people killed, including 64 people on Flight 77 and 44 people killed on Flight 93. Who were these people that would commit such a horrendous act against innocent people? American Airlines Flight 11 that hit the North Tower, the pilot was Mohammed Atta. The hijackers were Abdul Aziz al-Amari, Walid al-Shurhi, Satam al-Sukami, Well al-Shurhi. American Airlines Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon, Hani Hanjour, the pilot, Khalid al-Midhar, Majed Moked, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and his brother Salim al-Hazmi. United Airlines Flight 93 that went down near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Ziad Samir Jara, the pilot, Saeed al-Ghamdi, Ahmed al-Nami, Ahmed al-Haznawi. United Airlines Flight 175 that hit the South Tower, Marwan al-Shihai, Mohan al-Shirai, Hamza al-Ghamdi, Fayez Bani Hamad, Ahmed al-Ghamdi. Of course, these attacks needed to be answered back with brute force, but Congress must give approval to go to war. This led to the most broad authorization for use of military force in American history. It was one sentence containing 60 words: that the President is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. This was not the only legislation passed to combat terrorism in our homeland. Stellar Wind, the NSA's warrantless surveillance program, mined data from databases of the communications of American citizens. This includes email, phones, bank transactions, and internet activity. This is the country's biggest spy center, according to Wired magazine. We only know now about this because of the data leaked by Edward Snowden. During all of this happening here, the U.S. military invaded Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom, the effort to destroy Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, as well as the Taliban for harboring them. In 2002, the Homeland Security Act created the Department of Homeland Security. President George Bush signed it into law on November 25, 2002. The attacks had devastating economic consequences as well. Many Wall Street institutions, including the New York Stock Exchange, were evacuated during the attacks. The first day of trading after the attacks, the market fell 7.1% or 684 points. New York City's economy lost 143,000 jobs a month and $2.8 billion in wages in the first 3 months. Finance and air travel took the heaviest hits and accounted for 60% of lost jobs. The estimated cost of the World Trade Center damage is $60 billion. The cost to clean the debris at Ground Zero was $750 million. 9/11 is now Patriots' Day, created on December 18, 2001. It's a national day of remembrance and mourning. Every year at Ground Zero, the names of all that died that day are read aloud. This is a time when we should be coming together and supporting each other. We need to let go of the last 18 months of hatred and division and start moving back towards a united people. There are too many things that we take for granted, and we need to start actually cherishing them, namely our freedom. It is too precious to lose. So today, my prayer is that you will encourage or lift someone's spirit today. Take off the mask and give someone a smile. Let's stop being angry at each other because that's what they want. Let's show them that as Americans, we cannot be divided and move towards a new day, a day of unity. Never forget.